네, 안녕하세요. 승승장구 이프로입니다. 오늘은 암호화폐 산업의 규제 환경과 앞으로 이제 발전 방향에 대해서 이야기를 해보려고 하는데요. 지난 CFC에서 바이낸스의 CEO 리처드 탱과 리플의 CEO 브래드 갈링하우스가 나눈 인터뷰를 중심으로 핵심 메시지를 정리를 해보겠습니다. 이제 암호화폐 업계에서 두 거물들이 인터뷰하는 것 흔치 않은데요. 내용이 내용이니만큼 의역과 오역 있으면 안 되어서 영상 제작하는데 정말 오랜 시간 걸렸습니다. 고생했다고 구독과 좋아요 한 번씩 부탁드리고요. 다른 건 몰라도 좋아요는 꼭 한번 눌러주세요. 여러분들의 좋아요가 제가 영상을 만드는데 큰 힘이 됩니다. 그럼 영상 시청하시겠습니다.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier this issue around kind of fragmentation of the regulatory landscape globally. I think, speaking for myself, and I'm sure actually many people in this room as well, many of us are quite used to looking at this issue through a fairly kind of US or Eurocentric lens. You're a former regulator yourself in the APAC region and kind of multiple territories. I wonder whether you could give us some insight into the differences in approach from kind of east to west. Which territories are doing it best in your mind, and where the opportunities kind of lay?
I wouldn't say east versus west. I would say that regulators that have a developmental or promotional angle in their mission statement, right? Those regulators tend to do much better because they would, other than their mandate to regulate the risk part of it, they also have a mandate to try to grow the sector, right, and develop the sector. So in my view, those are the regulators that really spend time, energy, and resources to understand this space. And in most instances, they are the one that come up with bespoke framework to just regulate that space. Because if you try to force fit into securities or commodities, it is tough because there are always rules that are archaic, right? So for example, the market structure is totally different for crypto. In traditional finance, you have your traditional exchange, you have the broker-dealer that does all the onboarding, the KYC, the KYB, you have custody that's done by somebody else, right? But because blockchain is a technology that allows us to disintermediate all this, right? So we do the KYB, KYC of customers directly as an exchange, right? So the market structure is very different. When you try to force fit it, and I speak to regulators globally, one of them say, what's your settlement period? Is it T+1, T+2? I say, this is blockchain technology, it's instantaneous. They can't get that concept. What is your clearing fund? How do you manage the clearing risk? I said, look, it clears instantaneously, it's settled instant. So there are still concepts that many traditional regulators struggle with. And then lies on the biggest challenge. Together with that, if you look at traditional media, we spoke about this earlier, the narrative is money laundering issues, scams, etc. But if you look at data, the amount of money laundered through blockchain and crypto sector, and blockchain is a traceable technology unlike fiat, is only 0.02% of global money laundered. And most of it happens through traditional channels, right, globally. And these are data published by US financial crime agencies, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is a very respected central bank, last year published a report to say that majority of money laundered in Singapore is through, traditional channels. But that narrative is lost, right? They choose to, for things that people don't understand, they choose to focus on just the negative part of it without understanding that, look, I can trace where the money goes to. And we spend a lot of effort educating law enforcement agencies globally on that front. Last week, we conducted close to 100 classes, both physical as well as virtual classes for law enforcement agencies around the world to highlight to them how do you use the techniques, how do you use this technology to bring about greater enforcement actions and better decision making.
And in terms of, I appreciate it, it's kind of Goldilocks problem. Like you don't want it to rulemaking to be too rigid nor too fluid. Is there any kind of jurisdiction that you would point to, just in one word, that you think is kind of whose porridge is most delicious?
I would say that I've dealt with quite a number. So normally where is one agency, and normally you're dealing with the smaller countries, where one agency is in charge of both the banking, securities, and insurance market space, they come up with the best policy, normally, because they are in control of all the different arms of regulations. Unlike, for example, US is such a big country and you have different agencies involved and they can't agree who is the primary regulator. Those are the situations that you face a lot of challenges.
Okay. And Brad, and before we move on from this question around the regulatory landscape, I just want to ask you kind of, to what extent is a kind of optimal regulatory regime the be-all and end-all here? It's something that comes up time and again in discussions around the pieces of the puzzle that need to align for crypto to kind of realize its kind of ultimate potential.
Yeah.
To what extent is regulation be-all and end-all, and to what extent do other factors need to be fit in?
Well, I don't think it's the be-all, end-all. I mean, I agree. Christian Carlo was on stage earlier and commented on the U.S. regulatory environment that, like, you're trying to regulate things we don't fully understand the implications of, right? Had the U.S. tried to regulate TCP/IP or HTTP in 1992, it's like, well, we don't understand how these technologies are going to be used. And you kind of have to see how things evolve a little bit and then figure out, oh, okay, this is how we should apply a regulatory framework around that. I agree with that. That's not really how the U.S. has operated. I mean, as Richard said, I think you have mouthpieces that I would highlight Gary Gensler, but I'd highlight Elizabeth Warren, who are prognosticating, and it's just false facts. They're not telling the truth. They're talking about how it's all used for scams and what have you, and the data does not support it. So I think if you think about the unlock for the next 10 years, regulation's absolutely one of them. But that's obviously not enough. And I think that, focusing on utility and how we're actually using these technologies to solve real problems, super important. I think some of the stuff going on in tokenization, and another example where I think we've underestimated the impact. Those are the things I think really unlock. The last one I'll throw out, using the examples I used before, as we think about unlocking the next 10 years, making these technologies easier to use. The last panel was talking about as the UX. I guess that's part of it, but if we didn't have HTML and we were thinking about the expansion of TCP/IP in the early 90s, we wouldn't have the internet as we know it today. And I think we need to the UI layer and just the hiding the complexity. Everybody in this room probably at some point has done the equivalent of a penny test sending crypto. Like, really? At some point, I think we'll graduate beyond that, and there are already companies doing stuff in this space that I think is profound and will continue to see the market grow a lot.
Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper on that utility piece then. It's often said that crypto eventually will need to recede into the background. It needs to be the case that those who are using crypto services or services built on crypto rails need not necessarily know that that's what's going on behind the scenes. I wonder, Brad, whether you could speak a little bit about the pieces of the puzzle that are yet to kind of fit into place to make that a reality.
Well, I mean, I'll use Ripple. I mean, I never want to do a commercial for your own company, but I think what Ripple's been trying to do is go to institutions and deliver a service that their customers have no idea that the cross-border payment they just made went through crypto. And they shouldn't care. It was fast, it was cheap, it was very accurate, and to Richard's point earlier, it settles very, very quickly. The things that I think, could be better, for those of us who self-custody, some of those technologies are hard. I heard horror stories, which I don't know if are true, but, people whose wallets were burned down in the fires in LA and their secret keys were in the safe that also is now melted. That on one hand, that's the nature of this technology.
네, 앞선 영상 잘 보셨을까요? 보시고 나서의 여러분들의 의견 궁금합니다. 댓글로 자유롭게 달아주시고요. 오늘 영상 이제 요약해 드릴 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 자, 첫 번째로 중요한 포인트는 이제 규제 기관의 관점과 임무입니다. 리처드 탱은 단순히 동양, 서양이라는 구분보다 더 중요한 것은 그 규제 기관이 산업을 단순히 통제하려는가 아니면 그 산업을 육성하려는가 라고 말했습니다. 이제 암호화폐는 기존 금융과 구조 자체가 다르죠. 블록체인은 실시간 정산, 중개자 없는 거래, 자동화된 계약 실행이 가능하죠. 이런 기술을 기존 증권법이나 상품법에 억지로 끼워 맞추는 건 한계가 있다라는 것입니다. 그렇다면 가장 효과적인 규제 모델은 어떤 것일까요? 이제 리차드 탱은 예를 들어서 이제 싱가포르라든지 아랍에미레이트처럼 단일 기관이 금융 전반을 통합 관리하는 구조를 이상적인 모델로 꼽았습니다. 이러한 구조는 정책의 일관성과 실행력을 높여준다라고 얘기를 했죠. 반대로 미국처럼 이제 SEC라든지 그 다음에 CFTC, 그 다음에 연준까지 수많은 기관이 얽혀있는 구조는 서로 체결을 미루며 혼란만 커질 수 있다고 했습니다. 실제로 미국에서는 누가 주된 규제 기관인지조차 합의가 되지 않은 상태이고요. 그리고 암호화폐에 대한 왜곡된 인식에 대해서도 이야기를 했는데요. 리처드 탱은 언론과 일부 정치인들이 여전히 암호화폐를 자금 세탁, 사기, 범죄 온상으로 몰아간다고 지적을 했습니다. 하지만 사실은 그렇지 않았죠. 암호화폐를 통한 자금 세탁 비율은 0.02% 수준에 불과하고 대부분의 자금 세탁은 정통 금융 시스템에서 이루어지고 있었습니다. 그리고 해당 부분 같은 경우에는 미국과 싱가포르 금융당국의 공식 보고서에서도 확인을 할 수가 있었었고요. 이제 바이낸스는 블록체인 기술의 추적 가능성과 투명성을 알리기 위해 작년 한 해 동안 전 세계 법 집행기관을 대상으로 100회 이상의 교육 세션을 운영했다고도 밝혔습니다. 이어서 리플의 CEO 브래드 갈링하우스는 중요한 시각을 제시를 했습니다. 규제는 산업 성장의 전부는 아니다라는 것입니다. 그는 과거 1990년대에 인터넷이 성장하던 시기를 예로 들면서 만약 그때 TCP/IP나 HTTP를 미리 규제하려 했다면 지금 현재 우리가 누리는 인터넷 환경은 불가능했을 것이라고 말을 했는데요. 즉, 기술의 방향성을 충분히 이해를 하고 나서 규제를 설계를 해야 한다라는 것입니다. 하지만 현재 미국 같은 경우에는 여전히 이해보다 억제를 앞세우는 분위기죠. SEC나 정치인들이 데이터가 아닌 공포에 기반한 주장을 하고 있다는 점에서 우려를 나타냈습니다. 그래서 브래드 갈링하우스 같은 경우에는 향후 10년간 암호화폐 산업을 위해 다음 3가지 요소가 핵심이라고 강조를 했습니다. 균형 잡힌 규제 환경, 산업의 성장을 가로막지 않는 방향으로 규제 프레임워크가 설계되어야 되며 실질적 유틸리티, 특히 자산 토큰화 분야 같은 경우에는 아직 과소평가되어 있지만 대규모 자본시장과 연결될 수 있는 중요한 성장 동력이라고 언급을 했고요. 그 다음에 사용자 경험 그리고 유틸리티, 기술은 점점 사용자 눈에 보이지 않도록 숨겨져야 한다. 이 말은 뭐냐면 예를 들어서 제가 카카오뱅크를 통해서 외국에 사는 제 사촌한테 송금을 했는데 이게 블록체인으로 작동을 했지만 블록체인으로 작동했는지도 몰라야 된다라는 거죠. 그러면서 브래드는 암호화폐 플랫폼이 작동하는지 소액의 암호화폐를 먼저 보내본 경험이 있는지를 말하면서 암호화폐 또한 이 UI, 유틸리티 혁신 없이는 대중화가 어렵다라고 언급을 했는데요. 이 산업이 발전하려면 대중 친화적인 유틸리티가 필요하다고 말을 한 겁니다. 자, 정리를 하자면 규제는 산업의 필수 조건이지만 전부는 아닌 것이며 기술의 본질을 이해하고 데이터를 기반으로 한 정책 설계가 필요합니다. 그리고 또한 무엇보다도 암호화폐 기술이 실제 문제를 어떻게 해결할 수 있는지에 대한 설계가 필요한 것이고요. 오늘 소개해드렸던 브래드 갈링하우스와 리처드 탱 두 리더의 발언은 암호화폐가 단순한 투자 수단을 넘어서 미래 금융 인프라로 자리 잡기 위해 우리가 어떤 기준으로 제도와 기술을 설계해야 하는지를 잘 말해 줬는데요. 여러분들의 생각은 어떠신가요? 제가 오늘 준비한 영상은 여기까지고요. 내용이 좀 길다 보니까 이 영상은 이제 2부 영상인데 이제 1부 영상 같은 경우에는 영상 더보기란에 제가 링크 달아놨습니다. 이 영상도 같이 보시는 걸 추천을 드리고요. 저는 그럼 다음 더 좋은 영상으로 찾아뵐 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.